Hoi anō tēnā koutou katoa. Tuatahi ka mihi atu kia koutou katoa e hui mai nei I raro I te tuanui o tēnei whare tēnei pō. Ngā mana, ngā reo, ngā karangatanga maha e mihi ana kia koutou katoa. Huri ngā whakaaro ki tō tātou kingi e noho ana I te ahurewa tapu o na mātua tūpuna. Ngā mana ki tango te rungurawa ki rungi iaia, piki te ora, piki te kaha, piki te wairua. Pai marire, o tira ki a rātou kua mene ki te pō. Rātou kei tō te ārai, moi mai koutou I te ringa kapu tō tātou whaia hine nui te pō. Hoi anō kia tātou e hui mai nei tēnei pō, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So first and foremost, just like to thank you all for the offer to come and spend some time with you and talk a bit with you this evening and to greet all of you in all of your various capacities, both personal and professional, and also to spare a thought for our Māori King at this time who fulfills an important role for the kingitanga and ask for blessings on his health and well-being. Also to those who've passed on to the next world but who are with us in spirit, I send thoughts to them and greet all of those of yours who have passed on and acknowledge that while we come as individuals, there's a mass that stand behind us. So to you and to them, good evening, and I look forward to having a bit of a conversation with you tonight. Gavin and I are a double act. I haven't played a major role in iwi partnerships. Gavin's been much more at the forefront and I'm on the board, so I tend to be a little bit further removed from the direct partnerships, but have a bit of an understanding of how it all works, so try to bring that to the discussion around it. So tonight just really want to talk to you about the partnerships that Mighty River Power's been involved in and some of the principles that underlie that. Because Mighty River has been held up as a bit of an example in terms of some of the relationships that we've been able to develop, particularly in moving beyond passive landowner leasehold type relationships where a developer comes in and pays the landowner for the use of the land and they receive a rental and are fairly passive in the whole thing. We've moved into co-constructive type relationships where the landowners have an involvement and an interest in the development, and that's been good for us and good for them. So just to tell you a little bit about some of the context and principles of moving into those sorts of relationships. I've been on the board of Mighty River now for 13 and a half years, which is a fairly long lag, and I come off next month. So this is one of the last things I'll probably do in my capacity with Mighty River. But during that time, a key involvement, and one of the reasons that I'm on the board, is to support ways for Māori and Mighty River Power to work together for mutual benefit, including cultural, environmental and economic benefit. And over that time, the company's undertaken a number of significant power projects. So we've had already developed a power station at Mōkai, which is 75% owned by Tū Aropaki Trust and 25% owned by Mighty River Power. And there's an option at some stage for the trust to take over full ownership of that. Tauhara North No. 2 Trust, we've built a power station at Rotokawa, and that's a 50-50 JV with them. We also have another power station on their land at Ngā Tamariki. We also have Ngā Wapurua Geothermal Power Station, which is 65% Mighty River and 35% Tauhara. And there are others. So we'll go into a bit more detail around some of those soon. But the Mighty River Power, Tū Aropaki and Tauhara grouping is now one of the world's largest geothermal power stations by installed capacity. So we've got about 40%, geothermal makes up about 40% of Mighty River's total generation portfolio, and it provides premium baseload generation, which, unlike other renewable energy resources, is not weather dependent. So most of this capacity has been developed over the time that I've been on the board, so I've got to see how those relationships have worked up. And it's no easy feat to get through those projects and the arrangements that underlie them. But in addition to those geothermal power stations, Mighty River operates 9 hydro stations on the Waikato River. And this involves us in relationships with iwi and hapu along the river. And so there are a number of relationship agreements around that, those partnerships as well. So the projects have been led by the team at Mighty River, and my part has been at the board level to assist with a cultural understanding around the backdrop to those and to assist to guide good strategy and business decisions. So it's really about that cultural backdrop that I want to talk a bit about tonight, and then Gavin will get into the actual nuts and bolts. So it's a good space that we've got to at the moment, now. It's a good space to be in these kinds of relationships. The tribes have been there for a long time and they're not going anywhere. If you take one of my tribes in the Tainui region, when we look at the cultural landscape there, our ancestors came out 800 odd years ago, settled at Kawhia, over time made their way inland, settled the whole sort of region that we've come to know as Tainui, but actually goes from Taranaki, Mōkau in the south, right up into Auckland, South Auckland, over including the Hauraki Gulf, through Taumarunui. So there's this very large area that takes in a lot of the Waikato River. And overlaid there are generations, and I think it's about 40 generations from my ancestors that came on the canoe from out of French Polynesia to Kawhia. It's about 40 generations through to us. And so we know the stories about many of those ancestors, and we know where they lived and we know what they did. And so when we look at the landscape, it's with that kind of lens. We know the stories that go with that hill and which of our personal ancestors were involved, where they're buried, bones, all these whole rich tapestry of cultural overlay that's there when we look at our landscape, and it guides what we do. So it's a very, very personal, our connection with the land and with the river and with everything in the region. It's a personal history. And so when we come to talk about things related to it, we can get a bit, we take it seriously. Because on top of that, we've been told that we have responsibility to keep it all in good shape for future generations. And we know that our ancestors did their best in the times that they had available to them to look after the place, and that now we've got our time and we have the same responsibility, and that we've be handing that on to the next generation. So all of that is in the back of our minds when we sit down at the table to talk. So having that intergenerational responsibility, and then coming to the table with Mighty River Power, who actually has very similar imperatives. The company is in it for the long haul. The hydro stations are not short-term assets. They will be operating for a long, long time. And unless there's some revolutionary technology that disrupts it all, hydro energy is going to be a key part of our generating future. Also, the geothermal assets likewise are going to be around for a long, long time. So our ability to operate relies on having a licence to operate from those people in the community who are our key stakeholders, and iwi and hapu are in that category. And so our interests are aligned. Our interests are aligned in the sense that we're in it for a long time, we want to get on with each other, this is not a quick fix, this is an enduring type of relationship that we need to strike. Secondly, we both really care about the environment. The company needs a healthy environment within which to operate. It also needs to ensure that it is a good operator in a community sense, and that it's doing good things for in terms of the natural resources that we use. So our interests are fairly well aligned in that space as well. So there's some good reasons for us to be able to sit down and work things out, and so that's why I say we're in a pretty good space. The cultural context that we operate in is largely unseen. It's hard to understand if you're not from it. It's hard to see it. It's hard to know what it is. Māori talk in terms that a lot of people don't understand. When we talk about our tikanga, it's hard to nail it down in a short sentence and make it understandable, because the expressions that we use don't come from the English language, because the concepts are backed up by a whole lot of values and history. It's really hard to explain it. We kind of know it, but we can't necessarily articulate it well for you or somebody else to understand. So it takes time to work our way through. We know what's important to us, but it takes time for us to co-construct solutions that are going to be enduring for us. The guy in the top photo there, his name is Bill Galvin. And when I first started on Mighty River, he was one of the first people I met during my induction process. His people come from a place called Orake Korako. It's a geothermal kind of area along the banks of the river. His family, he was born at the pa, right at the side of the river, and his mother and his grandmother had their homes there. He was around, he was party to all the stories around the flooding of that territory when the hydro dams were put in. His pa and his family's pa went underwater as a result of the hydro, and his people were moved up land. That was a place that they had occupied for hundreds of years. In the ground were the bones of his ancestors. In caves along the river bank were the bones of his ancestors. Those had to be relocated in order for the hydro to be accommodated, and many things came floating up when the river came down. Ancestors and all sorts of things floated to the surface. When he took me up the river, we stopped at one point and we had karakia, we had prayer, because we were above the marae on the water. And his pain was palpable, because he lived through the anguish of his mother and his grandmother and all their families at this happening and them not being able to do anything about it. And he carries that with him. And he takes it very seriously when he talks to us about trying to keep their memory alive, trying to keep that connection with what was there, and trying to protect and preserve their cultural identity for the future. So they're not simple conversations, they're emotional conversations, loaded with all kinds of history and values, and they really need us to understand that when we talk to them. Māori is one of those cultures that's called a high context culture, and I don't know what the particular fields of study are, but there are some cultures that are labelled high content cultures and others that are high context cultures. High context cultures, it's important to take care of a whole lot of contextual issues before you get down to the content of whatever it is that you're dealing with. Māori is one of those. So it's important to us to build the relationship, to acknowledge the past, to understand everything around a subject before we get down to the subject. So that's why we have these very long processes of engagement. That's why when you go into a marae, we have the formal pōwhiri process, and speech making goes on and on and on, and we love it because we're building our connections to one another, and we're telling, and we're going back for all kinds of historical periods, and we're telling all sorts of things that other people think are completely irrelevant. But to us, it's fundamental to building the context. And we find our connections, and then we have a cup of tea, and we might spend a long time doing that before we get to the matter that we've come to deal with. The thing is, with a high context culture, we're physically uncomfortable if we haven't done that. So when we come into a meeting and people say, right, cup of tea, let's go. Right, what we're here for is this. Our old people squirm because physically they feel unsettled because we haven't had karakia, we haven't had mihi mihi, they don't know who you are or where you come from, they don't know where you were born, where you were raised, they don't know if you might be a relation of theirs or have some sort of connection. And unless and until those sorts of things are dealt with, they can't really effectively get down to the matter at heart. Of course, we've moved on and we've acculturated and we've learnt to be able to cope with that, but actually our old people haven't. You know, people like Bill, it's really, he's one of those kind of old guys where that's really difficult. So if we want to have a good conversation with him, we need to be able to recognise and respect his culture and get him to a place where we can communicate effectively. So culture's really important. So, back to my notes, which I've kind of not looked at. The treaty stuff. The Treaty of Waitangi. I'll just move on a bit. Before I do, this is the bottom photo is from the opening of the Butch Power Station. Ngā Tamariki Power Station, Tauhara Trust, and the trustees. After many, many years, and there are many, many, many years involved in getting these projects up and running. And trustees toil unpaid generally through the very complex processes with Mighty River Power. Many of these guys have not had a tertiary education and are having to deal with quite complicated financial structures and legal constructs and generating models. And they have to get themselves up to speed, although the company's supportive, and they have to get them wrap their heads around what's going on because they are committing on behalf of their people. They have to go back to their stakeholders, their landowners, and explain it all to them in a way that they will get the mandate and the support to sign up to the agreement. It's a long process. People die through it and someone else comes on and has to get up to speed. Or elections are held and someone new comes on and they have to get up to speed. And your people just might not agree. And you might have to have hui after hui after hui to get them through to a point where they understand and support enough. So these guys work really hard to get these relationships up and running. The other kind of big backdrop to all of this is the treaty relationship. So the treaty relationship exists between iwi and hapu and the government. So Mighty River is not the treaty partner, the government is the treaty partner. But there are a number of matters within that treaty relationship that impact on us. So for example, at the moment, there's the water ownership issues. There's fresh water claims, and that has some bearing on Mighty River depending on what the outcome will be. It certainly had some bearing when we tried to go through our IPO process and we were held up with water claims issues. So there's those kinds of things. There's the land claims, so land along the river, land under the river. Who owns the land under the lake? You know, there's all that sort of stuff happening around us. So there's that treaty relationship that we need to know about. And the treaty, under the second article, afforded iwi and hapu tino rangatiratanga of their land, forest, fisheries, etc. So there's a concept in there that iwi and hapu adhere to around their relationship with their natural resources in their territories and how they exert their responsibility to care for those. And the ideas around their ability to care come from kaitiakitanga. And that now features in legislation, and it's in the Resource Management Act, and hence, you know, that's another part that the treaty relationship comes through that brings to bear onto Māori River's activities. So the tribes, having the concept of being custodians, which is not the right word for kaitiakitanga, but it's hard to find one, are grappling with trying to deal with a different cultural construct that talks about ownership. And so the fit's not quite right, and so we keep running into each other around who owns what, or who has authority over what, or who has the say. And so now we're getting more and more into the space of co-governance and co-management arrangements, which is really actually quite helpful for Māori River Power, because it means that we've got parties at the table co-constructing solutions to complex problems. So that we find ourselves in a lot of that territory through Resource Management Act issues and the Crown's relationship. But tikanga is reflected through legislation in some places, and so that then requires the company to have to understand these things. So all I'm trying to do here is just to let you know not to underestimate the complexity of this landscape. It's not easy to get these kind of projects up and running because you've got this multiplicity of issues to work your way through. Some of the key principles around entering into arrangements with iwi and hapu or negotiating with iwi and hapu, relationship. Because of this intergenerational legacy, because of the high context culture, relationships are fundamental to being able to do good business. Relationships need to be developed before you need them, before the hard stuff comes in. Relationships have a long lead-in time. Relationships are all about getting to see the whites of your eyes and knowing whether we can trust each other. What is the cut of your cloth? What is the level of your integrity? Are you here to do a quick and dirty and get what you can for yourself? Or are we going to be in this together for a long time, and can we actually coexist and work to create good outcomes for one another? And so it takes time to get to that point. And it might seem that you're investing a whole lot of activity that is tangential to the issue. But it's an investment. It's an investment in good outcomes, and it's part of what you have to do. So it's about respecting culture, recognising and respecting that there's something else going on over there, and trying to get to understand it. And it takes time, but you get to a point where you start to be side by side instead of across the table, and then the good stuff starts happening. There are multiple stakeholders on the other side of the table when you're dealing with iwi and hapu. So if we're talking about the river, we're generally talking about either land trusts along the river, or we're talking about tribes that operate around that river's territory. And they can have 30,000, 40,000 members. And all of those members have an interest in what's going on. And tribes generally try to operate in a fairly collective manner, where they consult and give people an opportunity to know what's going on, so open and transparent as possible. And so all of that takes time. And land trusts have many owners, and same thing, it all takes a lot of time. So hopefully you're getting the impression that it's not easy and it takes time and all the rest of it. But it's pretty good when you get there, when you get into that sweet space of actually they trust us and we can do business together and we've put in the hard yards and now we're going to get on and make some things happen. Because then we find, for example, that the land trust starts taking responsibility for getting the resource consent buy-in from stakeholders. The land trust becomes an advocate. So it's not just Mighty River going in and saying, look, we want to operate something here, and community, can you give us your support? And they go, evil, dirty, corporate, taking advantage of us. We've then got the tribe alongside us saying, actually, we've been with these guys for a long time, we've done business, we've done some other things, we trust them, we'll come out and help explain what's going on, and doors start to open. So that's Bill again, isn't it? That's Bill. That's the same guy I was talking about with Doug Heffernan, the chief executive. And having been on the board for a long time, I can say that it gets personal. You can't help but get personal because Māori make it personal. It's personal for us, so we make it personal for you too. And so it's pretty hard. I'd say Doug would say that he's really proud and got to a really good space around his relationship with the tribes. So I won't go on too much more. I'll let Gavin talk a bit now about the nuts and bolts, having been at the face of it. But I will say that we're proud. Māori are proud when we get to these days, which is when we open the power station after many years of hard yards to get there. And it's been a privilege to see the landowners, modest and humble people who have achieved these magnificent arrangements for their descendants. And just as a little aside, one of them on the opening of this big grand geothermal power station decided that the land trust members should celebrate all the signing of the agreements. They wanted to have a celebration, so they hired out the local topal pools and put on a little pool party for everybody, notwithstanding that they now had multi-million dollar investments in these big power stations. They splashed out a little bit and had they've been so cautious for so long and so careful that that was their thing, to splash out a bit. But I think over time, when there's going to be benefits coming through for all of their stakeholders, and that's going to be something that I think we can all support and be proud of. So this is kind of what they end up with, a brand spanking shiny new geothermal power station. But I won't talk any more there. I'll just hand over to Gavin, who'll take you through a bit more detail because he's been right in the face of it.
Kia ora Tania. E rā rangatira mā iho mā, ngā mihi ki a koutou. Ko Gavin Williamson taku ingoa, he kai whakahaere hurihiko ahau mō te kamupeni Mighty River Power. Ka nui te honore ki te mihi ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. We've got about 15 to 20 minutes left, so I might move through a couple of the slides reasonably quickly. But I just wanted to make sure, I guess this is the forward. No, it's the forward. So just quickly summarising Mighty River Power at a glance in terms of those who are not absolutely familiar with some of the things we do. And I guess my point is that a lot of this is driven off the back of our partnerships, is the point I'm trying to make with these. So we obviously have a strong retail business. We are now almost 100% renewable, and that is largely hydro, but around 40% of our generation is geothermal now. We are a meter provider for the automatic metering process. We have now entered into the partially listed environment where we have around 100,000 shareholders and a market cap of about 4 billion. So you'll see there our pride of place also as a trusted partner for the land trusts, for a lot of our iwi that we deal with every day. So I guess as Tania's pointed out, the key foundation of our growth has been those commercial relationships with Māori, particularly in relation to geothermal. So where did it start for us? And I guess we put this slide up here because at the end of the day, we originally started off as a hydro generation company. So the assets that Mighty River Power inherited, purchased from the Crown, was largely the Waikato hydro system, hence Mighty River Power. Now, it's a backbone of our operation, and I guess what we learnt in the early days is that it is very much more than an asset to River Iwi. And it sustains life, provides for its people. It's a living being. As Waikato Tania will refer to it, it is our mother. And to steal a whakatauki from Wanganui iwi, ko au te awa, ko te awa, ko au. I'm the river, and the river is me. And I guess this slide also is relevant too, for this is karapiro for those of you who know it. Kara, stone, piro, evil smell. And it gets its name from one of the major battles that took place there. And looking at that slide, even now you can see. So up on the top right is the switchyard for the station. That's situated right on an old occupation site. So that used to be a power site. And there's a second one in that place, just down a little bit. And interestingly, I guess the damage to those sorts of assets still continue. I would say, has anybody ridden the Te Awa Cycleway, which runs along between Cambridge and Hamilton? Right. Well, in the building of that chopped a piece off the corner of that power site at Karapiro. So we're still doing these, I guess, these dumb things when it comes to some of these historic assets. So. Karapiro, the other point it demonstrates for me, and I come back to my point that I made around the river being the mother, and you know, someone very recently likened our dams on the river to a tourniquet around the arm, and you can see the Karapiro it effectively blocks off the river. So what we have is a national asset. So it's a fantastic asset, but what it's also done is it, in my mind, has for the national good, you've had a disproportionate amount of payment and pain for the River Iwi in this case. So that sort of context is one that we built up and have certainly have the scars to prove it through our resource consenting process. There was a lot of difficult lessons for us in dealing with River Iwi and the reconsenting process. But what that did is it you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. It effectively led to some very strong and enduring relationships that we have with River Iwi. And I recall one of the Waikato Tainui people said to me recently that you can't, you can never solve an argument unless you understand each other. And so a big part of who we are is trying to understand our partners, and that has come from what we learned on the river. So I guess that's defined us. We've learned some valuable lessons. I mean, we have engineers now who kind of understand the concept that if you build a bridge across the river, it's not just about hydraulic flow. It's not just about engineering calcs. You're actually puncturing the body of the mother. And if you think of those sorts of concepts, it actually gives you a very different focus and a different perspective. And again, it helps you understand your partners. So very early on, we realised the value in having those strong iwi relationships along the river. And the Waikato, it flows through a number of rohi for the River Iwi. Tuwharetoa at the lake end, Ngāti Tahu, Ngāti Whaua, Raukawa, Ngāti Koriki Kahukura, Waikato-Tainui, and all of those, the iwi world, like New Zealand generally, is a small place. All of those individuals have trusts, have relationships outside of the river, and a lot of that has led to us dealing with some of the same people in terms of our geothermal development. So again, hence showed how the importance of getting those relationships right in the first place. So this is I guess a little more mundane in terms of tracking our geothermal growth. But if you look at the green bars, you can see that that's Māori River Power's geothermal growth. So we've invested more than 1.4 billion, and we've successfully completed 3 geothermal power stations domestically since 2008. And as I said before, it now takes up 40% of our generation. Premium renewable, baseload, and I'm sure I don't have to tell most of the people in this room, runs 24/7, typically generates about 3 times more electricity than an equivalent sized wind farm, and double that of hydro. So hydro, the capacity factors or utilisation rate on the river is around 45 to 50%. In other words, utilisation 45 to 50% of the time you're using your generators. Geothermal, 24/7, everything's going. So it is a great generation source. It's not subject to rain, wind, sun, and has a very small physical footprint. And I guess you look at a lot of our developments, you actually can't see them from most often or not, you can't see them from public spaces. Ngā Tamariki, for example, sits right in the middle of the forest. You've got to drive 5 or 6 k's into the forest till you get to it. So footprint-wise, it's a great outcome. But I would say that geothermal is certainly not for the faint-hearted, and does come with a lot of risks. It certainly comes with risks in terms of well success. It comes with risks in terms of geothermal fluid and just operating those power stations. Hence, Māori River has built up quite a technical resource in terms of geothermal development. Talking a little bit more about the strengths of our partnerships. So those are long-term partnerships with Māori trust owners, and it's allowed us to generate some long-term value. And also it has allowed, more importantly, our partners to generate long-term value, and it's also enabled some equity involvement in those stations as well. And I'll make the point later as well, but it's important it's really important to understand the partners that you're dealing with, and understanding what is the best solution for them. If you come in with a one-size-fits-all, you're bound to fail. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that for some, you've got to recognise that equity is an option. For others, it's absolutely not. And you're looking at a stream, a resource rental for fluid or something like that, cash flow stream. So it's all about understanding their cash flow situation. And to do that, you've also got to make sure that they have the best advisors available to them. So this is a long-term partnership, and it comes back to Tania's point that you're not here to outmaneuver your partner in the contracts. Or to get one across them from an economic perspective. This is about a long-term enduring partnership. Your partner has to be getting mutual benefit out of this process. So a lot of the time that involves equipping the land trusts with the right advisors, helping them set up the trusts, helping them through their own governance and decision-making processes. And you heard Tania talk about how difficult that is for a lot of those land trust individuals. They haven't dealt with decisions of this sort of nature. So I guess the other point I make is that those values need to be closely linked to sustainable land use and embrace concepts such as Mātauranga Māori, tikanga issues. You've got to understand those before you can really successfully develop a project like these. And that's where Māori River Power's values have been pretty well aligned with all of our iwi partners. And as Tania said, we are in it for the long haul. We're not going away. We've got long-term assets, and that means you look at the world slightly different to if you're looking at a short-term asset, the length of a business case. So I would say that these the strengths of partnerships, they're about a marriage of capabilities. Māori landowners have the access. Māori River in most cases has been bringing the capital and the technical skill base, but there's also a strong technical skill base that we generally try to utilise in terms of our trusts as well, and that's around understanding what their values are, understanding sustainable land use, helping with the RMA resource consenting process, etc. So just some of those, like all projects, they're never plain sailing. Land tenure is always a challenge, and it's a challenge in terms of multiple land ownership, very difficult to make decisions, very difficult, as I say, to have governance structures, the right governance structures and process. It's important also to understand the role of iwi versus land trusts. So in other words, the wider iwi won't always have the same view as a land trust, and if you don't understand that subtlety, you can fall into some traps. I guess again, Tania made the point that trustees tend to think intergenerationally, and it's about long-term mana, not as we would look at it, or attempting to look at it in terms of the lifetime of a plant. Geothermal, 25 years. Before you start to have to replace all the kit. And that's where the hydro, I think, has been useful, because those things are enduring assets that are going to outlive all of us. I guess I'd make a point in terms of not always plain sailing, that history can play a really big role where you're dealing with more than one land trust. And with geothermal development in particular, it's really important to get a good footprint on the field, obviously, and that can involve several land trusts. And it's not always easy to get land trusts to agree, and history can play a part in that, and that history may go back hundreds of years. So you've also got to bear that in mind, and sometimes you just won't get there, and certainly we've had some of those. I guess I was going to quickly look at some of the projects, and I will just flick through these quickly so that we've got a bit of time for questions and general discussion. But we've already talked about Ngā Tamariki. That was completed in 2013. That was our last project. And that started out with a bold vision between Māori River and Tauhara North more than a decade ago, when they secured the rights to access to the geothermal resource. It's 100% owned by Māori River Power, although Tauhara North receives a revenue stream and has an option to take an equity stake. And it's back to my point before, is that you need to be flexible enough to build in that option of taking equity over time. So Ngā Tamariki is the final chapter at the moment in our current program of geothermal development. And I'm sure all of you are reasonably familiar with the market at the moment. It's pretty flat, demand has been very flat. So you're not seeing anything being built at the moment, and obviously that relates to geothermal wind prospects, a bunch of stuff just sitting there in a consented state but not being built. So just the other ones that we have, I've talked about, Kawerau, if I can go back, Kawerau, that one was commissioned in 2008. It's again a slightly different model. It's owned and operated by Māori River Power, but it has steam and land access arrangements. So that's not an equity arrangement. It is a land access and steam with Pūtauaki Trust and some other landowners, and it's quite a complicated set of landowners in the Kawerau area. Ngāwapurua, commissioned 2012. Māori River has 65%, Tauhara North number 2 has 35%, with the option to increase that to 50%. So Mokai, now we're starting to get into some of the older stations. Mokai acquired 2003 and then expanded and owned by Turapaki Power Company. Now, if you haven't heard of Turapaki Trust, then I really recommend you go and Google them, look at what they've been doing, and much of that has been off the back of the geothermal development. They are a very progressive, very sharp, very commercially astute trust that has been growing their assets. They have recently bought MB Century, which is a drilling geothermal service provider. And they have some great other assets that they built up over time. So just coming to the end of our slides, but one in there on on profit for purpose. And I guess the point we're trying to make there is that the returns from these geothermal operations also allow some great investments for the benefit of land trusts and the people. So education, apprentice programs, leadership development, and apprenticeship programs is an interesting one because we have an apprenticeship program as well in Mighty River. And one of the things that I'm really keen on doing is bringing a lot of our river iwi and geothermal iwi young rangatahi through that process. So ultimately they will then finish up working for Mighty River, and then you've almost completed the full cycle of partnership. So what you've got is you've then got in your own senior management, you will have your iwi partners embedded in your business. That'll help your decision making, and it's moving that partnership to the next level. So a couple of last slides, just look zooming out to a higher level now. You can see geothermal is now New Zealand's second largest fuel source, 16% of national supply, and we're ranking 4th or 5th in the world for geothermal capacity. In terms of renewables, just make the point that we are in a really enviable position renewables wise. So around 80% at the moment of New Zealand's electricity comes from renewable sources. And if I can just digress for a second, you may have seen us with the Take Charge initiative, which is about converting our fleet to electric vehicles. And I guess the point behind that is if at the end of the day we can turn off the pipe to the Middle East, save ourselves $4 billion in import fuel costs, and start running our transport fuels off our renewables, it'd be a great place to be. So look, just last slide I had before we open it up is I just want to summarise some of the key learnings when I was thinking this morning about this presentation. I guess just the first one is developing generation projects with iwi requires a commitment to long-term and often personal relationships. So it has to be more than business, and it really has to be, as I say, it has to be a personal relationship. Because what you do over time, and it's that point that Tania made, you've got to sit across the table and you've got to, it's about disclosure of your own personal integrity, and you really have to lay that on the table. And my second bullet point is integrity is everything when you're developing with iwi. You have to follow through on your commitments, and if you give your word, keep it, no matter what the cost of doing so. Third bullet point I've got here is environmental sustainability, and it has to be the cornerstone of all of those developments. So successful developments for us have been because they've been sustainable renewable projects. And that is really strongly aligned with iwi values. Be prepared to be flexible with your commercial arrangements, and that was my point before. Don't go in with a one-size-fits-all. Try to look for the best solution for your partner. And make sure your partner has access to the best legal and commercial advice. And this is a long-term relationship, and it's not about outmanoeuvring in the commercials, which is a point I made before. It has to be transparent. Last bullet point is you won't always be successful at getting the project underway, but if you are successful with the relationship, the chances are you'll get the next one out of the blocks. And if you don't, you will have some enduring personal friendships, and they will last forever. So thank you very much.